Good morning to everyone. I'm happy to be back here. Yes, as Libby said, no, we had that first part last September. It's been a couple of months, and I really would like to apologize for the postponement of the second part because, in case you haven't heard, I met a little biking accident, so I couldn't make it for that day. I just want to do a quick check from everyone. Just very quickly type on your chat box, on the chat box, yes or no, if you were present here last September, just to let me know. No, so can you just let me know? Just type yes if you were here last September, no if you were not, so that just for me to know the profile of the audience. So most people have been here, no? There are a couple of people who weren't here. I will do a very short and quick recap just so that those of you who weren't here will have some kind of background and also a kind of refresher for those who are here, no? But my suggestion really is that you actually look at the recording, no? The recording of that first session, okay? So as Libby said, our topic is the Ignatian way of proceeding with research. And this is the second part, no? And as I said in my previous talk, we're not talking about the topic, no, or the purpose of the research, no? If your topic is Ignatian in nature, about Ignatian spirituality or pedagogy, or about faith and justice, or if your purpose is to help society, which I hope all research will do, that's obviously very Ignatian, no? I'm talking about something else. I'm talking about something underlying our research project, which is the meta-theory. And very quickly, for those of you who weren't here during my first lecture, no, the meta-theory would really be the assumptions, no, that we take for granted when we're doing research. When we're doing research, we're into data. We do observation, either through survey or interview to gather data. We define and describe the phenomenon using concepts, no? And then we use theories to explain. That's a very simple way of sort of breaking up the research project, no? But for you to be able to observe data, define concepts, and explain phenomenon, you really have assumptions about reality and assumptions about knowing, no? And our assumptions about reality, that's what we mean by ontology, no? Part of the meta-theory, and also our assumptions about knowing, that's what we mean by epistemology, no? So as you can see, just like this pyramid, if your base is not strong, your meta-theory is not solid, what's going to happen to your research project? It might collapse, no? It might fall apart. You might end up with inconsistent research methods or conclusions, no? The problem with most research is that the meta-theory is so implicit, no? It's not talked about, it's not explicit, and it's not examined. And because it's not examined and explicit, sometimes it becomes inconsistent with the actual research, no? And it's inconsistent also with the researcher's personal view. So for example, I'm a Catholic, I believe that reality is like this, and so on and so forth, but my research sounds like it's not consistent with my faith, no? So what I'm trying to say here is we don't need to speak religious language. We don't need to use Ignatian language to have a research that's legitimate, no? That has a consistent meta-theory with the rest of our research project, no? There are meta-theories which are secular, which are compatible with Ignatian spirituality. And this is why I talked about critical realism the last time, no? I introduced critical realism by talking about two important concepts, no? And today I will talk about two other concepts. For me, these are the four basic concepts of critical realism, which can help us in our research project, no? Our research project will become more Ignatian if we are consistent in terms of our meta-theory, no? But secondly, it will also make our research more sound, no? So I would like to encourage you to be active during this lecture in the sense that if you have thoughts, insights, or questions, even during the lecture, before the Q&A, please feel free to type them already, you know, and to respond to one another in the chat box, no? And maybe later on we will pick out some of the questions and comments so we can discuss them, okay? So with regard to critical realism, what is the approach we're taking, no? We said that in science, in the empirical sciences and experimental sciences, there are two very basic methods, no? Observation using our senses, no, sense perception, and secondly, experimental activity. So what critical realism does is it asks this question, no? If observation and experiments are legitimate, there must be something about the world that that makes it sensible and possible to observe and to do experiments. No? So the question is, what should the world be like for the sciences and research to be possible and intelligible? I think all of us believe in science, no? And all of us believe in research. Otherwise, why are we doing research, no? But for science and research to be possible and intelligible, no, and of course we use observation and experimental activity, there must be some conditions about the world. The world, reality, must have certain features that we are taking for granted. No? And these are the first two assumptions about the world that I talked about. No? The first one is that the world is intransitive. The world of science, or the world that science investigates, is intransitive. What do we mean by intransitive? We mean by that we mean it's nowhere independent. The world is independent of the scientist. The world is independent of the researcher. No? Hindi natin gawa-gawa ang world. No? It's not a mental product. Because if the world were merely a mental product, if I can make up my own world, there's no point doing science. There's no point doing research. No? All I have to do is create a world and say that's the world. No? So it sounds very commonsensical, but you'll be surprised, no, that many research work sort of forgets this and gets all convoluted. No? So the first pillar of critical realism, which is compatible with Ignatian research, is that the world is intransitive. A common word for this is that the reality is objective. No? But intransitive is a better word because it avoids all the, I think, pitfalls of the word objective. No? So it's intransitive, and the work of science, no, our theories, our methodologies, our research work is transitive. By transitive, we mean it depends on the knower. No? And so knowledge is a social production. It's not done independently or individually. We work within a community of scholars. No? That's why it's transitive. Anyway, the main point here is that reality is intransitive. That's the very first conclusion, the very first assumption about reality of critical realism. What's the parang implication of this? No, the implication is something very important. No, because the world is intransitive, we have to observe deference to data. We have to defer to data. We have to be faithful to facts. No, because of the sovereignty of reality. No. More than my theories, more than my views, more than my ideas and hypotheses, what is sovereign is reality. It's reality that will decide what is true or false, not me. No? So intransitivity is a condemnation of relativism. We cannot be relativists in research. Not only in the physical sciences, but also social sciences. We cannot be relativists. Okay, so that's the very first insight of critical realism. Remember, I'll talk about four. No, the first thing I talked about was intransitivity, and intransitivity rejects relativism. Okay, so please think about your discipline. Think about your research project. Are there remnants of relativism there? No? So it's something to think about. No? The second insight of critical realism, which I talked about last September, no, is stratification. No? And what do we mean by that? By stratification, we mean that reality has strata, three strata or three domains. No? And they are if you look at the circles, you have the blue circle, the smallest circle. That's the empirical domain, which refers to our experiences. No? And then you have the gray circle, which I call events, no? Which is the domain of the actual. And finally, the biggest circle, no? The red, no, which is the domain of the real, where we have causal mechanisms or structures. No, what's the point here? The point here is what is empirical and actual are real. All our experiences and all events are real. No? However, what is actual is not necessarily empirical. Not all events have been experienced because of the limitation of human perception. Just because we haven't experienced something doesn't mean it hasn't happened yet. No. So reality is greater than our experiences. Reality is greater than the blue circle. It includes the gray circle, which are events which we haven't experienced. No? But more than that, no, what is real is not necessarily actual or empirical. What does that mean? No? It means that reality is even more than events. No? Reality includes causal structures and mechanisms which may not be producing events, no, or experiences, but they are no less real. So the invitation here is for us to acknowledge the possibility that there are things out there that we haven't experienced yet. No? So in a sense, no, stratification invites us to epistemic humility. We have to be humble intellectually, no? Because there are causes that do not, but because causes do not belong to the empirical domain, causes are not experienced. No? We can only experience the effects of causes. So this is a condemnation of positivism. Okay, so the second insight of critical realism is stratification. No, there's a domain of the empirical, the domain of the actual, the domain of the real, and because of that, no, if you collapse all of reality only to the blue circle, you are being a positivist. No, and we should not be a positivist. Okay, so that means that if we're Ignatian in our research, we cannot be positivist. What is a positivist? A positivist believes that reality is identical to only our experiences. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. That's just our summary, and just ask you if you have questions. Are we clear more or less so far? Please feel free to ask questions if you have questions. No? Are we okay so far?
Okay, are we okay so far, participants?
Medyo mabilis yun, no? Because it's just a summary. I will go slowly. Okay, if things are not super clear, that's okay, no? Because it takes a while to really wrap our minds around this, no? So I think what's important here is this. Look at your own discipline, no? Your field, no? You might be in the physical sciences or human sciences, or most probably social sciences, no? Can you type out your field so that I will see what your fields are? Like, are you in engineering? Are you in psychology? Can you just type it out for me to see? So I will see the profile again. Psychology, okay. Maraming psychologists dito. Sociology, engineering, okay. Business. Okay, for all of you, no, you have to ask yourself, no, education, okay, nursing. For all these fields, you have to ask yourself, what does it mean to believe that the world is intransitive? What does it mean to believe that the world is stratified? Ano mga implications ito? And are they consistent with my beliefs? No? Literature, for example, Annabelle, I'll use your example. Sometimes in literature, there are schools of thought where intransitivity is neglected. No? It's all about meaning of the text, diba? And in a way, critical realism will contest that. Meaning is important, but it's not only meaning. No? There is an objective basis for interpretation because the text is there. The text becomes intransitive, no? And the world, no? The world, wait, Linda has a question. Medyo mabilis ka. Sorry about that. Are we given handouts? I think the slides will be given to you, okay? It's a little bit fast because it's just a summary, no? But I will go slowly, okay? So going back to literature, there is a tendency to sort of forget the intransitivity of reality, no? Kasi we focus a lot on meaning, and some people say meaning is subjective, no? But that's not really true, no? Because in a way, when we're interpreting a text, no, there is something objective, which is the text itself. Okay, so I think what's important here is to try to apply the concepts to your field, no? To your field. Okay, so yeah, let's go on. I will now go to the two next concepts. No, remember, science is about description and also about explanation. No, we want to describe phenomena, and we also want to explain what causes the phenomena. Right. So, what are the two concepts that I will introduce? So far, you have two: intransitive and stratified. No, now please promise me that later on, when you talk to your friends and your family, you will use those words so that you will not forget. No, you will impress them by using intransitive and stratified. But there will be two more: emergence and open system. What do we mean by emergence and open system, and what are the implications in the way we do research, okay, in our describing phenomena and our explaining phenomena, okay? So first, in terms of describing a phenomenon, the concept emergence is important, no? Now, I asked a little while ago what your fields are, what your science is, no? And some of you wrote there, some of you put physical sciences, others put social sciences, no? So there are two kinds of realities that we are studying. There are other kinds, no? But primarily in research, we're investigating physical reality and social reality. So for the physical reality, what are some examples? These are very simple examples, no? Rocks, trees, animals, gravity, atoms, galaxies, COVID-19, no? These are all physical realities, right? And then social reality, we have society, poverty, education, economy, government, business, capitalism, the list goes on, no? And I'm sure you can add to the list. So all those in yellow are physical realities, and all those in blue are social realities, okay? Now, let me just explain, no? Both of them are socially defined. What do I mean by that? Even if rocks exist on their own, no, our understanding of the rock is transitive. It's socially defined. We define what a rock is, what gravity is, what galaxies are socially. No, we use our mind and we talk to one another to define them. The same with society, poverty, education, economy. So both physical reality and social reality are socially defined. What's the difference between them? No? The difference is the one at the bottom right. Only social reality is socially produced. No? Physical reality is not socially produced. Rocks, trees, animals, gravity, even if there are no people, they will exist. No? COVID-19 might exist even without people. No? Now they're already infecting animals. No? God help us. But social reality, you cannot have that without society, without people. You cannot have society without people. You cannot have poverty without people. You cannot have education, economy, government, consciousness, learning. No? All the social realities cannot exist without people. That's the difference between the two. No? Okay, so let's go to emergence. No? What do we mean by emergence? Basically, emergence is against the school of thought called reductionism. No? Because there are more complex realities, no, that we are studying. For example, society. No? You have to know a little bit of psychology to understand society, right? It's a more complex reality. No? But you cannot reduce society to the people. Some people like to do that. No? They reduce society to people. They reduce the mind to the brain. No? So why do people like reductionism? Because reductionism is simpler. You only have to study people instead of studying society. You only have to study the brain instead of studying consciousness. No? So, but the point here is society is not nothing but the sum of people living together. We would like to condemn reductionism. No? We don't want a theory of everything. No? Some scientists want to come up with a theory of everything because it's simpler. No? Imagine if you can explain everything in terms of atoms and molecules, no? Using only physics and chemistry. Imagine if you can explain society, poverty, education, economy, government, only using atoms and molecules, physics and chemistry. It's so much simpler, right? But what we're saying is you cannot do that. We are against reductionism. We mustn't reduce to the complex realities, which are the ones on the right, to simpler realities. No? And this is what brings us to emergence. Let me read to you what emergence is. No? Emergence really refers to this phenomenon that new and more complex entities have their own particular properties and causal powers, and these complex entities emerge from a unique combination of more basic entities. No? Now, that's a mouthful. That's very dense. So I will unpack it for you. No? So some entities are more basic than others, right? And some entities are more complex than others. Yung mga complex entities are made up of more basic entities. No? And at the same time, when they emerge, they have their own special properties that cannot be reduced to the more basic entities. And they also have causal powers at their own right. Okay? If that's not clear, I would like to give you 3 examples, which are very simple. No? The first one is water. No? Water is made up of hydrogen and oxygen. We all know that. We learned that from the grade school. No? So water is rooted in hydrogen molecules and oxygen molecules. But you cannot just throw hydrogen and oxygen together to come up with water. There's a special combination needed for water to emerge, no, from hydrogen and oxygen. What is the special combination? You need 2 molecules of hydrogen and 1 molecule of oxygen to have 1 molecule of water. No? So a special combination. But see what happens once you have water. Water is emergent from hydrogen and oxygen, but cannot be reduced to hydrogen and oxygen. The properties of water are not the same as the properties of hydrogen and oxygen. Something new, something qualitatively new is happening there. No? So you cannot explain water by just enumerating the properties of hydrogen and oxygen. No? At the same time, water has a causal power that hydrogen and oxygen do not have. So what we're saying here is something qualitatively different has emerged from the more basic entities of hydrogen and oxygen. No? So if you want to understand water, we have to study water. We cannot just study hydrogen and oxygen. No? So that's why we need to study water at its own level. Okay. Here's another example. Computers. No? Computers are made of plastic, metal, silicon, and electricity. But you don't end up with computer just when you throw together any plastic, any metal, silicon, electricity. Plastic, metal, silicon, electricity should have should be combined in a special way for computer to emerge. No? But once computer emerges, you cannot reduce it only to its ingredients. No? Something very powerful has emerged. It cannot be reduced to plastic, metal, silicon, electricity. So computer is not nothing but the sum of its ingredients. If we want to understand computer and explain what a computer is, we have to study the computer. We cannot use our knowledge of plastic, metal, silicon, and electricity to explain what computer is. Something special is going on the level of the computer. This is what emergence means. You cannot reduce it to the sum of its parts. And finally, let's go to society. The same. Society is not nothing but the members in society. If we want to understand society, it's not enough to know psychology. You have to use the social sciences. You have to use sociology and all the other branches to understand society. Okay, that's what we mean by emergence. No? So emergence acknowledges that there's a hierarchy of phenomena, a hierarchy of realities. And here's a simple diagram that explains it. No? That there are higher order causes and lower order causes in this hierarchy. The most basic are the physical and chemical. No? For those of you who are physicists and chemists, that's your specialization. No? If there are biologists here, biology majors, biology scholars, no, you are focusing on the biological stratum, no. But as you can see, biology is affected by the physical and chemical already, no? But cannot be reduced to the physical and chemical. We have a lot of psychologists here, no. Psychology is a special discipline because the psychological reality is a legitimate reality in its own right. However, it's affected by the biological and physical and chemical. No? For those of you who are engaged in the social sciences, no, you have to also take into consideration the psychological, the biological, and the physical, but you cannot reduce social reality to the psychological, biological, physical, and chemical reality. No? So what's the point here? If we're studying something that is complex, you must make sure that you're studying on that level, but you're also taking into account the simpler levels that are included in your reality. So for example, if you're a psychologist, you cannot just look at psychology, period. You have to look at the biological part, the physical and chemical, but also the social, because they affect one another. So for example, if I'm an educational psychologist and my focus is learning, learning is a social psychological phenomenon. no? For me to really understand learning, no? For me to be able to describe learning, I cannot just focus on the psychological, no? For example, how the brain works, no? How memory works. I also have to focus on the social, no? What are the social factors that affect learning, no? And at the same time, I also have to look at the biological and physical and chemical, because without a brain, you cannot learn. And if, for example, if the body is hungry or sleep deprived, learning is also impeded. So they affect one another. That's what we mean by emergence, okay? That's what we mean by emergence. So every level is irreducible. You cannot reduce the social merely to the physical and chemical. Some people want to do that because it's simpler, but we must resist the temptation to do that. Learning, love, joy, for example, are not just our neurons exploding and, connected to one another and communicating with one another. There's something going on at the level of the social and psychological. Every level is causal and every level is real. This is why every science is legitimate, no? Because according to Roy Bhaskar, the originator of critical realism, the nature of an object determines its cognitive possibility and defines the science proper to it. So if the object of your investigation is psychological, if it's learning, no, then it determines how we can know it. We can know it by studying it on the psychological level, no? And it defines the science proper to it, in this case, psychology. Okay? So the hierarchy of causes, the hierarchy I showed you earlier, gives rise to a similar hierarchy of sciences. That's why physics is legitimate, chemistry is legitimate, and so are biology, psychology, and the social sciences. Okay, that's why interdisciplinarity is very important. No, when you're doing research and your object of investigation is not something basic, like, for example, a rock. No, a rock is more basic. No, but if you're talking about climate change, if you're studying poverty, if you're studying education, if you're studying learning, no, it's important to be interdisciplinary in your approach. No? So two big ideas as far as emergence is concerned is, number one, we must reject reductionism. And number two, no, we must try to be interdisciplinary if the object of our investigation is complex. So again, I want to stop here and ask you, think about what are the objects of your investigation. Are they more or less basic and simple? Or are they more complex? My guess is for most of you, it's complex. No? So how will reductionism affect your research? What is the temptation of reductionism in your research, number one? And number two, how can you be interdisciplinary to make sure your research is more complete? Okay, so that's my questions for your reflection. Let me just look at one comment here in the chat box. How do we reconcile here the limitation of the study in terms of emergence concept po? Okay, can you explain what you mean by limitation of the study? Would you like to elaborate? I think I know what you mean, but it might be better if you can elaborate a little bit. I don't know who asked this question. Socio RC Agas.
Agas.
Would you like to elaborate?
Yes, Father, good morning.
Yes, good morning.
Yes, Father, because emergence has a wider, as you mentioned, Father, no, it has a very wide scope, but usually our orientation is, although I think I'm referring to the format that we have, no, in our dissertation, that we have to cite still a limitation of our study. I do not know if we could equate that to I don't know if it's reduction, Father. So
what's your name? I'm sorry, how do I call you?
Rhea po, Rhea Cagas po.
Rhea, actually, that's a very good question. I'm glad you asked that, no, because it really clarifies things. No, obviously, when you're doing a thesis or dissertation, you cannot do everything, right? And one of the important rules in, defining a research project through the research question is that it should be something manageable. Otherwise, hindi ka matatapos, no? So that's a very legitimate question. That's why it's important to include a limitation of the study. So what's my point here? The point here is, precisely in the limitation of the study, you have to say that. For example, you have to, because the problem is sometimes in our research work, parang we don't realize that the phenomenon we're studying is much more than the level we're focusing on. So for example, if you're studying learning, no? And of course, learning is affected by the biological, the physical, chemical, and also the social. You can say in the limitation of your study that your focus will be more the social and psychological, no? But you will acknowledge that obviously the biological and physical and chemical will also affect, no? But at least you know that you are focusing only on the social and psychological. Okay? Compare that to someone who forgets that the object that he or she is studying includes other levels. No? So the more sophisticated researcher is the one who is mindful of the limitations of the study and actually mentions them. So Rhea, did I answer your question?
Father, very clear po. Thank you, Father.
Oh, so don't be afraid. I'm not saying your dissertation should include everything. No, that's not the point. The point is
my theory kasi, Father, is open systems po kasi, Father. So
I'm sorry.
I'm trying. My theory kasi in my dissertation is open systems po. That's why I'm trying to digest. Although it's later pa man, Father, that you're going to discuss.
Yeah, actually, that's the next concept I'll talk about in the open
Yes,
system, which actually makes it even more complicated. No, but anyway, so again, I just want to sort of recap that we have to reject reductionism. No, I don't think I don't. If you want your research to be Ignatian, no. Also, many social scientists today would reject reductionism. No, very few would just like there are very few positivists today. There are also very few reductionists today. No, medyo pasay na ang pagiging reductionist. No, is society nothing but a group of people living together? The answer is no. Are people nothing but a product of social conditions? The answer is no. Also, no. We have to study. We have to respect the complexity of reality. No? And for me, that's the third conclusion. Remember, the first one is we have to be respectful of data. The second one is we have to be humble, no, because we don't know everything. The third, we have to be awed by complexity. No, reality is very complex. Reality is mysterious. No, and we have to respect that complexity and not try to reduce or reject the complexity by reducing reality to something more basic. Okay, so that's the third concept. I hope you're thinking about your research and thinking about your field as I'm talking about this, so we can discuss a bit more. Otherwise, you're going to find my discussion irrelevant or meaningless, and you won't be able to parang engage with it. Okay, so I'll stop here for a while and just ask if there are other questions about emergence. No? So far, the questions are really good. So please don't be shy, no? Okay, about questions. So far, I think what's important is you ask yourself, intransitive, stratification, and emergence. Parang checklist, no? How am I doing in the way I approach the objects of my study? If I'm in business, how do I study organizations? No? Do I tend to reduce the organization into something more basic? No? Can I resist reductionism? No? If I'm studying business, can I resist positivism and also relativism? Parang yun mga tanong that I want you to, we have to resist kasi relativism, positivism, and reductionism so far. May pang-apat pa. There's a fourth temptation. No? Okay, so I hope you're following. No? Let's go on. The fourth concept is the open system, no? The open system that Rhea already mentioned. No? So when we explain phenomena, whether we're studying gravity or we're studying poverty or we're studying learning, we want to be able to identify causes. And here, the concept of open system is very valuable, very powerful. No? So the first concept we studied was intransitivity, right? And because of intransitivity, we're rejecting relativism. No? The second concept we've studied is stratification. And because of stratification, we're rejecting positivism. And the third concept I just discussed now is emergence. And because we're taking up emergence, we're rejecting reductionism. Ito yung pang-apat, open system. What do we mean by the open system? The open system is a description that actually applies to the world outside the laboratory, no? Because the laboratory is a closed system. Okay, so what happens in a closed system? No, so in a laboratory, no, what the scientist does is the scientist tries to come up with experimental control. I think we know this, no? Even a grade school student who's done a scientific experiment would know this. What happens in the laboratory? We control the variables. We don't want a variable to get in the way of the experiment, no? So for example, we want event 2 to follow event 1, no? But in the real world, event 2 might not happen because other things might get in the way, no? So, for example, if I want to study gravity, I will drop, let's say, a ball in the laboratory, no? And I will measure the velocity of the ball and the time and so on and so forth, no? So, in the outside world, I can't just wait around for a ball to drop from anywhere because other things might get in the way. Somebody might catch the ball, no? But in the laboratory, you'll make sure there'll be no extraneous variable, no? So in a closed system, this is what happens, no? Event 1 is followed by event 2, and it's because of the cause, no? In this case, gravity, no? When I drop the ball, which is event 1, event 2 is the ball hits the floor because of the cause. The cause is gravity, no? In the outside world, there might be another cause that might get in the way. Someone might catch the ball, it will not hit the ground, no? So in the outside world, in the open system, it's more complicated, no? Like this, no? So remember, originally in the laboratory, there's cause 1, which is gravity, no? And if gravity is left alone, event 1 will lead to event 2, no? But if in the outside world, if we don't have control, no, other causes might get in the way, and event 2 will not happen after event 1. After I drop the ball, event 3 might happen. Somebody caught the ball because other causes got in the way. So it's very simple, no? Very simple. The open system means that there are many causes that interact with one another and they co-determine events, no? In the laboratory, that's not what happens. In the laboratory, because of experimental control, there are no extraneous variables. So there's only one cause, no? And event 1 leads to event 2. Okay, now I'm going to talk to you about something a little bit complicated, but very important, no? The open system, the concept of open system, contests and interrogates and criticizes our usual understanding of causality, no? The traditional understanding of causality comes from David Hume, no? And it's called the it's a positivist and successionist view of causation. What does that mean, no? For David Hume and for many scientists after David Hume, no, causation means event A is the cause, and then the next event, event X is the effect, diba? Cause and effect, diba? But actually, that's only correlation, diba? Remember in statistics, no, our teachers always warn us, do not mistake correlation for causation. Just because two events happen, they are associated with one another, it doesn't mean that the first event is the cause. But in fact, when we do research, sometimes or very often we make this mistake because of this view of causation, no? The open system tells us that this is not the correct view of causation. Event A is not the cause, no? Event A is only the condition, no? It's only the condition that allows event X to happen. Let's go back to the example of gravity, no? If I drop a ball, no, that is event A. What is event X? The ball drops to the ground. What is the cause? The cause is gravity. Okay? So take note, no? My dropping the ball, event A, is not the cause. It's only the condition for gravity to work. If I let go of the ball will hit the ground because of gravity, no? Can you imagine a scientist saying, I would like to explain why the ball hit the floor. And then if you think it's event A, you will say the cause is that you let go of the ball. Hindi naman scientific yun, di ba? The scientific explanation is you let go of the ball, that's the condition, but the real cause is gravitation, gravity. Diba? So now you can see the natural way of explaining causes is not the scientific way. In our world, in our life, no, when we explain causes, we always say event A is the cause, but it's actually not the cause. No, the cause is something underlying. It's not an event. Remember, causes belong to the domain of the real. They don't belong to the domain of the empirical. No, now, so causation is not about the events. It's about the underlying cause. No? So causation, the redefinition of causation is it's not necessary correlation. It's not event regularity. It's not event A is event B. No? Neither is it the constant conjunction of events. All these three phrases mean the same thing. It only means that causation is not event X, no, being the result of event A. That was the traditional definition of causation. No? Why is this not the case? No? Why can't we say that causation is one event following another? Because of the open system. Why? What do we say in the open system? In the open system, other causes can get in the way. No? So for example, if I drop a ball in the open system, no, and I expect it to hit the ground because of gravity, no, if somebody catches the ball, it doesn't mean that gravity did not work. You know? So even if there's no effect, it doesn't mean the cause is not there because of the open system. Now think of examples from your field where the cause is real, but there's no effect. Can you think of examples from your fields? So my example is very simple, gravity, no? But can you think of examples in your disciplines where there was a cause and the cause was working, but another cause got in the way, so it didn't happen? Okay, isip tayo, you have to think, you have to be active so that you will learn, otherwise you'll forget and you won't understand. Can you think of examples? I'll give an example. Learning, okay? Because I'm an educator, so some of you are education also. So in learning, for example, what causes learning? There are many different causes, right? Now, just because there is no learning, no, doesn't mean that the cause wasn't active. No? So for example, one important cause of learning is motivation. It's one of many causes, right? Just because a student doesn't learn doesn't mean that the student is not motivated. There might be other causes that might get in the way. For example, maybe the student was sick. Maybe the student is sleep deprived. Maybe the student is hungry or malnourished, no? Okay? So if you believe in the traditional view of causation, no, this one, let me show it to you, no, you will say that learning, there's no motivation, no, because there's no learning, no. But in this particular one, you can say that there was motivation, but the reason why there's no learning is that maybe the body was not, healthy, no. Maybe the learner was hungry, no. So in short, you don't discount the cause just because there's no effect. Okay, we have a hand raised, Jessa. Is that your name, Jessa? You have a question?
Yes, Father. Good morning. With regards to your earlier doc, Father, that you have asked us to think of an example. So I think I have an example, but I am not sure if it is related to this.
Let's give it a try. It's okay. Please share your example.
Okay po. So since I am teaching for business research, so one of the students that I taught last semester, they were studying the effect of financial stress to the academic performance of the students. So we also use, or they have also included, intervening variable or moderating variable, which is the student loan. So according to empirical evidences, it shows that financial stress affects academic performance, but because we have included the student loan as the moderating variable, it shows po that there is no effect between financial stress and academic performance po.
Okay, so that's a very good example. That's a very complicated example, but first of all, in the open system, we're acknowledging that there's more than one cause. No, so in this particular case, you have financial stress. No, and in your study showed that there was no impact, right, on academic performance because of the loans. No, in short, there were conditions, no, and other causes that got in the way of the financial stress affecting the academic performance. So if your conclusion is there was no impact, it doesn't mean that financial stress does not have a causal power. It only means that there are other causes in the open system that interact with that cause. No? So note, no, if you're not mindful of the open system, your conclusion might be a bit simplistic and say, walang effect. No? But in actuality, what you should say is that because of other intervening causes, no effect has been observed. But it's still possible that it would have an effect if there are no intervening causes. So you can note that the conclusion is a bit more sophisticated because you are mindful of the open system. Okay? Okay, let me just go to Avi's question. No? Intransitivity rejects relativism because reality is objective. Stratification rejects positivism, no? Because reality is bigger than our experiences. No? Emergence rejects reductionism. And open system, mamaya na. Let me explain that first before I give you the answer, okay? And then from Francis, who's a doctor, no? The condition is COVID-19, the cause is SARS. Is SARS the virus? Sorry, hindi ko alam yung medical terms, no? Yeah, so Francis proposes a way of looking at things, no, where the cause is the virus, right? And then the expected effect is death or recovery, no? Whether it's death or recovery is determined by different conditions, no? And also other causes, no? So, Francis, ang masasabi ko lang sa example mo is it's important to distinguish between conditions and causes, no? Causes are not events. Causes are not experiences. No? They're conditions. No? Whatever we experience or whatever happens, those are conditions. Causes are the underlying. So tama ka that the virus is the cause. No? There are other underlying causes that can interact. For example, the motivation of a person to keep away from to follow the health protocol. That's a cause. No? So you should show the interaction between those causes. Okay. Okay, let's go on. No, because I want to make sure we cover everything before we go to the actual discussion. No, so we have to redefine causation. Causation is not empirical determination. It doesn't mean just because event A happens, event B will happen. It's not automatic anymore because in the open system, other causes get in the way, right? It's instead, it's necessity without determination. It means that causal laws are not about events happening automatically because the open system, other causes can get in the way. Causal laws are about tendencies, no? Tendencies of acting in the open system which may or may not be realized in any sort of outcome because of the open system. Example, the SARS virus, no? Tama ba yun? The coronavirus. The coronavirus is a cause, no? If the cause is there, there's a tendency to get infected or to die, no? But just because there's a virus, just because there's an infection, doesn't mean you're going to die, no? It may not be realized in any sort of outcome. Some people don't even experience symptoms, no? And they don't actually die, right? They recover. So it's not automatic. It's not deterministic, no? So here you're already beginning to see the clue, no? What does the open system reject? It rejects determinism, no? That kasi before, many scientists, many researchers have a primitive view of causation that just because you have A, B will happen. That's not true. Just because you have gravity doesn't mean things will fall. other causes get in the way. A very good metaphor for this, these tendencies of acting, this new understanding of causation is a chess game, a game of chess. No? According to Anscombe, outside the domain of closure, outside the laboratory, in the open system, in the world at large, causal laws or laws of nature are like the rules of chess. The play, the actual play of chess is seldom determined, but no one breaks the law. So in the same way, causal laws are like the rules of chess or any game or sport. No? Nobody can break the law, but the events are not determined automatically. No? So it's necessity without determination. Another way of putting it is causal laws define the possibilities and limits of how things act in the world, but causal laws do not dictate their outcomes. Okay? So again, I want to stop here and ask you about your discipline, about your field, no? And think about examples you're studying, no? What are some of the causal laws that you believe in, that you subscribe to, no? Do they automatically lead to the event? The answer should be no, because of the open system, no? So for example, think of examples, no? Okay, like genetics, for example, no? So people are beginning to think about examples in their field. That's good, no? But what's important here is we have to reject determinism, no? Just because there's a cause, no? And even if the conditions are there, there might be other causes that might get in the way. For example, lung cancer, no? One other cause that can get in the way is medication, no? Medication can act, the chemical powers of medicine are causes that can obviously fight, no, the way a cancer progresses. Okay, so let me go on. So there's such a thing as dual or multiple control, no, which means the higher order causes are not absolutely determined by the more basic causes, no. But remember the hierarchy of causes, no? The physical, chemical, the biological, the psychological. The higher order causes are not absolutely determined by the more basic causes. But at the same time, the higher order causes are capable of acting back on the lower order causes. They also have causal power over them. And let me go back to the example of learning. No? So for example, if I'm hungry, I'm sleep deprived, no? Or I'm sick, the biological laws, the physical and chemical laws will affect my capacity for learning. But just because I'm hungry, sick, or sleep deprived doesn't mean it's impossible for me to learn. My motivation, which is a higher order cause, can act back, no? And limit the effect of these. It'll be harder for me to learn because I'm hungry and sleep deprived, but it doesn't mean that it's impossible for me to learn. Okay? So this interplay in the open system is very important. So if you're doing research, you must be mindful of the different causes, the different types of causes, and how they interact with one another. Okay? So natural, biological, and social causes provide us with possibilities and limits, but they do not determine our behavior. We can enable or constrain the operations of the physical, biological, and social causes that we are subject to. So the example I gave is hunger, sleep deprivation, no? Sickness. No? Of course, they affect us. No? They limit us. No? They define the possibilities, no? Of learning, no? Open to us. No? However, we can enable or constrain their operations. So this diagram, I think, can sort of summarize what we're talking about. In a way, this summarizes both the open system and emergence. No? Because as you can see, there are levels, no, of realities, no, social realities, psychological realities, biological realities, and physical and chemical realities, but they interact with one another in the open system. So let's focus on human agency, no, or free will, or motivation. It's a psychological cause, no. Obviously, it's affected by social causes. Your motivation, your free will is affected by causes. It's also affected by your body. It's affected by the physical and the chemical. No? When we're talking about learning, that's an example. But at the same time, looking at the yellow arrows, we can also act back. No? For example, peer pressure. Peer pressure affects my capacity to learn, but I can also sort of ignore peer pressure or let it get to me. No? So I can act back on it. No, I can also act back on the physical and chemical and also on the biological. So in a way, when you're doing research that is faithful to emergence and the open system, you must pay attention to this diagram. No? So how do they interact with one another? You don't need to include it in your report, no? In your actual thesis or your actual dissertation. What's important is that as you're thinking through your research, you pay attention to all the possible causes and conditions as well. No? And as I mentioned earlier, if you're not going to focus on them, it's fine as long as you are aware of it. And if you feel it's good to mention it, you should mention it in the limitation of your study. Otherwise, people might think you're simplifying reality. Okay? So what the fourth conclusion, no, is that just as the first three concepts came up with implications and rejected a particular school of thought, the open system is all about the free will. Human agency is also causally efficacious. No? Human agency is a causal power. No? And this is very Ignatian. No? But social scientists today already consider human agency as a legitimate causal power. And as a result, we are rejecting determinism. No? This is a little bit subversive. No? Some people might think, oh my gosh, now human free will pala is already a causal power. No? But I think more and more social scientists and psychologists are acknowledging this because more and more of them are becoming critical realists. No? The sad part is critical realism is not yet fashionable in the Philippines, but our counterparts in Europe and the US are all now really going towards critical realism. Okay, so let me now sum up so we can have some discussions. No? So we've been talking about meta-theory. No? We've been focusing on ontology. We didn't talk about epistemology yet, but there are already implications. No? So our meta-theory are our assumptions. No? So when we're doing research, when we're investigating a particular phenomenon, regardless of which branch of science it belongs to, it's important to make explicit our meta-theory, at least to ourselves and maybe to our supervisor. What are our assumptions about reality, our ontology? What are our assumptions about knowing, no? Our epistemology? And only then, no, should we identify the subject? What are we going to study? No? Imagine if you're aware of emergence. No? When you talk about your subject, you'll be able to say, oh, the subject I'm studying belongs to the social-psychological, or it belongs to the biological. No? And already you're aware of what other things affect that, no? Because of the hierarchy. And then you can formulate your research question. No? And of course, your theoretical framework and lit review, the concepts and definitions will be affected by your meta-theory. No? Because, for example, stratification will make sure that you do not limit yourself only to what has been experienced, the empirical. No? You will already begin to acknowledge concepts and definitions, no, which may not be completely empirical yet. For example, for Einstein, the black hole was not empirically verified, but he already came up with a concept of the black hole. No? So Einstein was a critical realist without his knowing it. No? Because if he was a positivist, he would not even recognize the possibility of a black hole because there's been no experience of a black hole. Even up to now, there's no experience of a black hole. No? And your conclusions, the way you confirm theory, revise the theory, or replace them, no? And your methodology and analysis will also be governed by your meta-theory. So hopefully there'll be a greater alignment among all these different portions of your research. So for me, a meta-theory is very valuable in terms of ensuring consistency, no? Across your subject, your topic, your theoretical framework, your methodology and analysis, and your conclusion. Otherwise, you might get inconsistent and you might be all over the place. So as a conclusion of Ignatian way of research, no, what would an Ignatian meta-theory look like or sound like? I think an Ignatian meta-theory should be characterized by a subscription to intransitivity, to stratification, to emergence, and to the open system. As a researcher, scientist, or scholar, you must believe that reality is intransitive, no? That reality is stratified, reality is characterized by emergence and the open system. Those are the four pillars of critical realism, which I propose to you are compatible with an Ignatian way of proceeding in research. So the world, as always emphasized in Ignatian spirituality, the world is complex and mysterious, and human knowing is finite and limited. And those four concepts at the bottom will ensure that we are faithful to these two core beliefs in Ignatian spirituality. We're not trying to simplify or reduce the complexity of the world. We're going to be deferent to reality, as in intransitivity. And we are, going to be acknowledging the open systemic world, and at the same time knowing that our knowing is always finite. Okay? So again, the four concepts are anti-relativist, they're anti-positivist, they're anti-reductionist, and anti-determinist. When you think about it, these are the four big temptations when we're doing research or when we're studying a particular phenomenon: to become a relativist, to become a positivist, to become a reductionist, and determinist. Now, let me ask you, in your discipline, if you have to choose from among the four as the most powerful temptation, what would it be? Would it be to be a relativist, to be a positivist, a reductionist, or determinist? Can you type it very quickly in the chat box? Iba-iba yan, depending on your discipline. If there is one that you should be most careful of, so Avi says reductionist. Avi, can you type also your field? So reductionist, and what's your field? Okay, if it's education or psychology. Okay, so yeah, Avi, that's very fashionable in psychology to be reductionist, no? So you have to ask yourself, do you believe in that? No, it's not very Ignatian, no? Okay, what about the others? Among the temptations, what would be the biggest temptation in your field? Maybe not you, but what about in sociology? What would it be? Jerian, what is the biggest temptation? Is it relativist, positivist, reductionist, or determinist? So please, when you answer, give the temptation and your field. Right, that's very true. Up to now, in sociology, positivism, no? Positivism is a big temptation. Ano pa? Can I hear from the others? So positivism for sociology, yes. And I think many professors are positivists, no? So, di ba? Like, we want only quantitative kasi nabibilang, no? Why? Kasi mas madali, di ba? Mas madaling gawin pag positivist, no? Okay? Yeah, but quant is not so fashionable anymore. Medyo pasay na. So be careful, no? Di ba? So I hope you will have very exciting debates in your departments now because of this, no? Because, it also helps you to update. No? Many of our contemporaries, our colleagues, have moved on. Nag-move on na po sila, no? Pero tayo, naka-attach pa tayo sa past. Medyo doy buds ng konti, nakakahiya ng konti, no? I'd like to engage you para you can also begin to think about your work, di ba? Kasi what's important is that this lecture is going to be relevant, no? So if I don't ask you questions like this, I'm not giving you an opportunity to relate it to your field, no? So it's important, I think, for you to think also. So please continue the discussion para lumalim ang ating understanding of critical realism, okay? I would like to propose that these temptations, no, are not helpful. No? They're not going to help you become a better learner in your fields. No? They're not going to help you become a better scholar or intellectual or researcher or scientist. No? But for you to agree, you have to agree with intransitivity, stratification, emergence, and open system. And I cannot prove them true. I cannot prove them to be true. They are philosophies. They are ways of looking at things. No? So do not expect me to come up with a survey to prove that they're true. You have to decide. You have to exercise your judgment. Does it make sense that reality is intransitive? Does it make sense that reality is more than our experience, stratified, and so on and so forth? Okay? But I can say that those four are compatible with the Ignatian worldview. Okay? So, in summary, I want to say that these are the mindsets or attitudes that an Ignatian researcher should have. we have to defer to reality. In fact, that means we have to respect data and facts. No? Do not doctor your data. Kasi reality is intransitive. Number two, we have to be epistemically humble. No? Just because we haven't experienced it doesn't mean it's not real. No? Reality is more than the empirical. Just because all of humanity in all of history has not experienced it doesn't mean it's not real. There's always the possible. Just like Einstein recognized the possibility of the black hole, even without any evidence, only mathematics, no? The possibility. No? He was humble enough to acknowledge this might be true. And see what happened. No? We were able to progress because of that. No? We have to be in awe of complexity. Let's not be allergic to complexity. No? Pag hindi natin naiintindihan, pag mahirap intindihin mo, you simplify. Because if you simplify, you are reducing it, you're distorting reality. No? Climate change is not just weather. Climate change is also people and the way people act. No? It's easier to understand climate change if you reduce it, but it's no longer climate change. It's only a part of climate change. And finally, we have to exercise our freedom responsibly. No? Because we are rejecting determinism. No? As we are causal agents with power. Okay, so that wraps up really my lecture. I know it's a lot. It's actually worth a 3-unit course, but we only did it in 2 mornings. No, so I don't know if you have questions or comments you'd like to raise at this point. We have some time before 11 o'clock. No, so please feel free to raise your questions either on the chat box or to unmute yourself. Libby will be the moderator, right, Libby?
Okay, yes,
sige.
Father.